Hi, I'm Greg Dell, and today I'm here with attorney Stephen Jessup. How are you, Steve?
Hey, Greg.
And today we are going to discuss business overhead expense policies, also known as BOE policies. Now, Steve, I know usually when we handle these types of BOE claims, they're on behalf of doctors, lawyers, business professionals. They're almost always ERISA exempt individual disability policies, so you don't have to worry about any of the laws from ERISA, because if these claims are challenged, you're always going to have your right to a jury trial, which is an awesome thing for these types of claims. But these claims can be really challenging because you're dealing with a claimant who is, probably about to stop work or has stopped work, but still has a business running with expenses. And that's the reason they bought this policy, was to cover business expenses because they were disabled, to hopefully keep their business running or get their business to the point where they can sell it and continue to cover those expenses while at the same time they deal with their medical issues. So what are some of the most common issues that you experience, first off, with these business overhead expenses that make them challenging to often collect on?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is this is obviously going to be driven by your actual expenses. So profit and loss statements, making sure that the information that's being documented on those, because the insurance company is going to request all of it, is accounted for. A lot of times I'm sure you'll see where they'll ask, well, what was this expense in this given month? We didn't see it in this month. So it's a matter of really making sure that your bookkeeping is really well documented in order to be able to establish, what are covered expenses. And, in the event if the person is still working, sometimes they'll only pay percentages of expenses. So there's a lot of analysis that really is financially driven. And if you don't have your finances in order per se, a lot of clients will say, well, I do it at the end of the year. My accountant, handles everything and rectifies everything. Well, the insurance company is going to want to see that month to month. So a lot of times you're having to go back and kind of make sure all that stuff is documented properly.
Let's talk about some of the common issues that come up or misconceptions from potential clients who don't fully understand what the policy covers. And you said it a minute ago, covered business overhead expenses. What are those usually that are protected by the policy? I usually find that people think, let's just take a dentist, for example. The dentist figures, I'm going to hire another dentist. Dentist will come in. My business overhead expense policy pays $10,000 a month, and I'll pay a dentist $5,000 a month. Well, do you find that most policies will cover the salary for the new dentist that comes in?
Most policies don't. Just like usually if you have a BOE policy, you'll also have an individual disability policy, and you may buy certain riders for that. Same with the business overhead. Typically, there's an income replacement for someone in your profession. A standard overhead expense policy typically won't cover the salary for anyone who's brought into the business to replace your duties. Typical ones you'll see rent, leases, equipment, payroll for your employees, and mind you, that isn't a replacement for your actual billing. And I have seen some policies that are written that if your employee is billing out, like say in a dental medical practice, we have an assistant who can also do billing that you would be able to do, they won't cover that as well. It's usually the payroll of your regular employees. Each policy is different, and one of the other things, a lot of times these policies are older. So the variance in language is greater the older the policy from carrier to carrier.
I also see a lot of the policies where if you're not totally disabled, that they're only going to pay for 3 months, as opposed to, they usually are 12 months or 24 months, but if you're residual, they'll only pay for 3 months, which I think is crappy, because a lot of times someone becomes disabled, they may not necessarily stop 100% what they're doing, they might work through their condition, have a loss of income for 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, and then go total. So, but during that period of time when you're struggling, trying to maybe get someone to buy your practice, get someone else in there because you're hurting, doing it when you really shouldn't be, but yet that business overhead policy isn't really protecting you during that period of time. So that's a concern in some of the policies. Some of the other business overhead policies I've seen, it's more on the older ones, which aren't that good, talking about how the expenses have to exceed the revenue. And if the covered expenses don't exceed the revenue, then the policy doesn't kick in, which basically means your business has to go from being profitable to operating at a loss in order to collect on the policy, which I think is ridiculous. That's a real crappy policy, if that's out there. What about things like, I see that often the policies won't cover things like supplies. that a business has to buy, because that's not a covered type business expense. So, there's lots of issues that come up with the business overhead expense policies, and there's some things that you can really, really do to maximize your business overhead policy. For example, a situation that we see a lot is person's going to stop working, but they have a lease for another 2 years. So if they sell the practice, does that mean that they still have that policy cover them for the lease? I mean, I'm sure you've dealt with that situation many times.
It does come up, especially if you, as the individual owner of the policy, are still responsible financially through that, then there is. Or, like has happened sometimes, if you're selling the practice, is there a way to, as part of trying to negotiate that deal, maximize that business overhead expense to say to the purchasing party, hey, I can still cover these expenses because they're on my name's on it, so we can use that to sweeten the pot a bit in the sale.
Right. That has helped a lot of people where they're able to say, look, I'll pay your rent for 12 months because we know the policy will pay the rent, and then they're able to increase the value of the buyout for the policy and kind of maybe get an advance on that money for the policy. So there's lots of nuances and different things you can do with the business overhead policy. You have time to file your claim, even though most of them have a 30 or 60-day elimination period. Don't feel like right at 30 days, right at 60 days, you have to contact the carrier and tell them. You can take a longer period of time. We help clients all the time go through the application process, help them handle the claim if they've already done it on their own. And also if there's a denial, obviously we work through those and try to get those business overhead expenses paid back to you that are owed. So give us a call for a free consultation. We'll need to see a copy of your policy, and we're available to help you at any time.